Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Tom McHugh. I'm one of the admission counselors at College of the Holy Cross, and this is a Mythbusters Holy Cross edition. We're all here to debunk specifically 4 myths about standardized testing, and very glad that you're here to join us. So before we jump in to this myth busting, just want to address some housekeeping items. First of all, closed captioning is available throughout today's webinar for anyone that wants to use that. And we also have a question and answer feature as well. So you can feel free to submit your questions at any time. We'll do our best to get back to you very quickly, but we'll also make time for a Q&A towards the end of the webinar as well. Also want to mention that throughout this week, which is February break for a lot of local high schools, we're offering virtual tours as well as virtual information sessions at 11 o'clock each day. So if you haven't had the chance to attend, definitely encourage you to do so. You can hear from some other current students and counselors as well. We're also hosting a variety of webinars this week. Thursdays, tomorrow's is about the role of parents and guardians in the admission process. And Friday is a seminar on how juniors can strengthen their applications to college. So we've had 2 previous. You're catching us right in the middle of the week, obviously. And all of these are going to be archived on the Holy Cross website. So holycross.edu/visit is where you'll be able to watch today's session again and to catch up on anything that you might have missed. So once again, my name is Tom McHugh with the admission office. I'm joined here by my colleague, Olivia Berlin, and we're lucky to be joined today by Andrew Corbett, who is a junior chemistry major and on the pre-med track. He's originally from down the street in Norwell, Mass. And Maggie Plowman, who's a sophomore environmental studies major from Chicago, Illinois. So the first myth that we're here to debunk for all of you, and this is really, before you sign up for tests and have to put the number 2 pencil to paper, just some thoughts and hopefully ways to feel better and kind of contextualize standardized testing in the process. Our students aren't going to be sharing their own scores per se, but they are going to be speaking generally about how standardized testing affected their college admission process and kind of how it factored into their decision to end up at Holy Cross. So one preconceived notion we think is that standardized tests are the most important part of a student's college admission process. And while understandable, we at Holy Cross definitely do not feel like that's the case as a school that's been test optional since 2005. And Maggie, I'd just love to hear from you in terms of how standardized testing went for you during high school, and how you viewed it, and then how it factored into your decision to end up at Holy Cross.
Yeah. So for me, my standardized tests were never really something that I felt like reflected my application as a whole or myself as a whole. And so going into the college process, I kind of seeked out schools that were test optional, like Holy Cross. And I really felt like, for many reasons, I was drawn to those schools because it seemed like schools that were test optional cared a lot more about the student and about myself as a whole. I wasn't just a number. And Holy Cross, you can kind of see that in the student body that they are test optional because there's really interesting people and it's this really strong community. And I think that is in part because they look at the full application of the student. And so for me, I did not submit my test scores because, like I said, it wasn't something that I felt reflected me. And my application process still went really well. And love it here, and I'm happy to be here.
And it's, I think, a good way to think about it. You're able to select whether or not you believe your scores are ultimately something you want to include or not. It gives the power to the students to select, this is a strength of mine, I think it will help me, or I'm going to hold this back and allow the strengths of my personality to ultimately shine through. And this is the kind of college that I want, who doesn't need my standardized test scores. And Andrew, I know in chats with you, you came at it from a little bit of a different angle, but obviously ended up at the same place as Maggie. So talk to me about your standardized testing journey.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So my journey was a little bit different. I took the exam or the SATs, and then I also took subject tests on top of that. And to the schools that I applied to, I sent all of my tests because I felt that it was just one more thing maybe to add to my resume, but I ultimately arrived at the same conclusion that Maggie did. Even though I sent my scores and Holy Cross being test optional, I didn't have to do that. It was something about the Holy Cross community and the campus that being a test optional school meant that kids actually really cared about each other. And I think Maggie made a great point. I wasn't just a number. That's not something that defined me. There were all sorts of other things that kind of went onto my resume that spoke towards what Holy Cross really cares about, say community service, anything else besides just being that number.
And we have a lot of phrases at a school like Holy Cross, being a Jesuit institution, and one that you hear often amongst our students and faculty on campus is cura personalis, a Latin phrase which means care of the whole person. And I think it's important that we reflect that in our admission process too, that there is, this holistic review process where we really take a close look at all aspects of a person and not just boiling it down to numbers or data. Before I turn it over to my colleague Olivia, for Andrew and Maggie, I know both of you guys had interviews, which for us is more important oftentimes than the SAT or the ACT. So just wanted to get a sense of kind of how that factored into your process, speaking with a representative of the college, maybe in lieu of test scores or in addition to test scores.
Yeah, well, I had my interview with you, Tom. So that was something that I really did feel like was a big part of my application process to Holy Cross. And I felt like that was more important and kind of gave me more confidence in my process than my test scores did. And then it just kind of reassured me to know that Holy Cross truly did care about more than just like what's on paper.
Yeah, I agree, Maggie. I think it was another thing that I could demonstrate to Holy Cross, besides just being a name on a page or a number that was a score on an exam. I was able to have a conversation, which sounds weird for an interview to be a conversation, but that's exactly what it was. It was a conversation of what I was into, what my likes were, and I can tell you that it felt natural and it felt right because I didn't really have to think too much about it. I wasn't scared to have that interview because it flowed very well. And I think that speaks to Holy Cross's community feel that they really care about each other here on campus.
Yeah. And as opposed to standardized tests that there's all this prep work for, you kind of just come as you are, which I really appreciate. All right, Olivia, what is myth number 2 that we're debunking today?
Absolutely. I think this segues super well into our second myth that we want to address. And that one is that test optional means exactly the same thing at every college or university across the country. As we've seen a lot this year, given the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot more colleges are implementing either a temporary test optional or a permanent test optional way of reviewing applications that they may not have had before. And then, there's always been, a decent number of colleges that have been test optional for a longer period of time, such as Holy Cross. And so just looking at how different colleges are approaching test optional from different ways is a very important part of your process as you're figuring out which colleges you want to apply to and which you're interested in potentially attending. So everything that, that we're talking about with regard to Holy Cross admission today is true for Holy Cross admission, right? But it may not necessarily be true for every college that you're looking to apply to, regardless of whether that college has a test optional policy or not. So one of the most important things you can do for yourself in your search process and in your application process is to do a little bit of research and talk to some people at every college that you're looking to apply to, because everyone's going to approach test optional a little bit differently. One of the questions that we've actually received in the Q&A that I'm going to touch on in this section as well is about what the process of going test optional, how can that help or hurt a student's application? Where we have a question asking, will going test optional only help candidates who are at the top of their class, or will it help reflect well on a student who is maybe in the middle but is still a strong student? It's really going to depend on who you are as a student, right? And it's going to be different for every person. The reason I want to touch on that is because Holy Cross basically reviews test scores in a very similar way that we review every other optional piece of our application, right? So for some colleges, they may not see test scores that way. For us, we do. So that means when we're reviewing applications, there are certain things that are required in the application process and a lot of things that are optional. The required things are, your high school transcript, the actual application form itself, your essay, a letter of recommendation from a counselor, and at least one letter of recommendation from a teacher. Those are all of the things that are going to be necessary for your application to Holy Cross. In addition to that, there's a lot of optional things that you can add as well. And so tests are part of that optional category. In addition to that, we also have optional interviews, which for instance, Maggie and Andrew have both taken advantage of in their process, but not all students do. We also have optional parent recommendations. We have optional additional letters of recommendation from teachers or perhaps coaches or other important figures in your life. So there's a whole number of different optional pieces that are part of your application, not just for test scores. So think of your test scores in a similar vein as the interview, as additional letters of recommendation, and things like that. It can help your application if you have a strong test score that you really want to show off to us, but it's not going to hurt your application if you choose not to submit it. Another thing that we often find is that students will wonder if my application is super strong in all of these other ways, but I feel that my testing isn't quite as strong, should I send it? It's up to you, but know that if everything else in your application is strong and your testing isn't quite as strong, we're not going to ding you because of that necessarily. It's one piece, again, of your application, and so it's less important than a lot of the other pieces. I hope that explanation helps you all better understand a little bit of how we as admission counselors are approaching the test optional kind of format here at Holy Cross, and how that may be different from some other colleges that you're looking at. Certainly feel free to put more questions in the Q&A as well. That Q&A is open for this whole session. We'll answer some questions throughout, and then we'll also save some for the end to be answered live, either by myself or Tom, or by our students, Maggie and Andrew as well. So with that, I'm gonna pass it back to Tom for our third myth.
Wonderful, thanks, Liv. So myth number 3 really segues nicely, I think, with the points that Olivia just made, in that I think students fear that if they don't send their scores, that us bad guys on the admission committees will assume that you did poorly on the test, or that you didn't take it, or that you have test anxiety. We honestly and truly don't mind either way. There's no assumptions that are made on our end. And I like to use visual aids, and I think of your application as a puzzle, and there's nothing worse than when there's that one missing puzzle piece that's hidden under the couch. Those are not your test scores. You can still have a very complete application and puzzle without your testing information. And we feel well equipped as counselors to look closely at the other aspects, your coursework over 4 years, your letters of recommendation, those who are supporting you, as well as maybe you supporting yourself in your interview and attending sessions like the one today, demonstrating interest. And just historically, we've seen about 1/3 of our applicants in the past not send their testing information, whereas this year it's been kind of the inverse of that, where 2/3 of our students have not been sending any of their standardized test scores. So just know that if you decide, for whatever reason, to be a student who does not send test scores next year, that you're very likely in the majority. You're the norm for us. So hopefully that gives you some more confidence, regardless of what your results are, or if you're able to take the test at all with COVID, that you are putting yourself in a good spot, and you are going to still be very heavily considered and beloved by admission committees. So Andrew and Maggie, back to you guys. I know in conversations, we are talking about the present moment, but also kind of looking back and looking ahead. So Maggie, I'll have you just talk a bit about growing up in the Chicago area, kind of the testing culture, and how that ultimately influenced who you are today, and your general thoughts about standardized testing.
Yeah. I think as many times as people tell you, like, schools do not care if they're test optional, they don't care that you don't send it, it doesn't hurt you. It's still, in this college process, it's so large, it's such a large pool. It's hard to believe that. So it was difficult for me to kind of decide to not send my test scores to some schools. But I think something that kind of in my past really made me sure of it was um, when I applied to high schools in Chicago, just because there are these schools called selective enrollment. It's basically the college process when you're in eighth grade, and that's not very fun. And unfortunately, there's no interview, there's no essay, no extracurriculars. It's just your test scores and your grades. So that was, I think, a very formative experience for me. And then once I got to the college process, I kind of knew what it felt like to feel like a number. I knew that feeling. I knew I didn't like that. That wasn't a representation of me. And when I was able to interview, not send my test scores to schools, have an essay, show my extracurriculars, and like all these years in high school, that was far more better representation, and it made me much more confident. So I know not everyone has that same experience from high school applying, but I can say that it doesn't feel great to feel like a number. And if you do not want to send your test scores, don't. If it's something that you feel, go with that. And you can have the confidence that Holy Cross fully supports that decision.
And Andrew, speaking of being forward thinking, I know you're in the midst of thinking about the next chapter of your life. So speak a bit about kind of the moment that you're presented with and how standardized testing has come back full circle for you.
Yeah, I am back into the middle of it. Less than an hour ago, I actually signed up to take my MCAT, which is the medical college admission test. Basically the exam equivalent of the SAT, but for medical school. So I'm right back into it right now. And I can tell you that I wish that there were medical schools that are similar to Holy Cross that are test optional, because I'm sure the stress that a lot of our attendees are feeling today. I have it all over again, where I'm thinking about being a number, taking that exam, and that being who I am for this application process. And it is a little different than the SAT, where the SAT is optional at a lot of colleges and the MCAT really isn't. So I can tell you that I am envying all of you guys right now applying to Holy Cross, where, if the SAT doesn't go well, or if it's not something that you want to include, then so be it. But I do wish I was in your guys' shoes, that's for sure.
And before I turn it back over to Olivia, I think we had a very thoughtful question, and one that I hadn't even considered before preparing for this webinar. But regardless of whether or not you send the SAT or the ACT scores along to us, you're a student at Holy Cross that is going to be prepared for academic challenge and rigor. So for you, Maggie, and Andrew afterwards, how did you and your peers go about adjusting to the rigors of Holy Cross? Testing doesn't matter. Everyone's a student and going to be challenged. So I'd love to hear what your perspective is on that.
Like many other colleges, Holy Cross is rigorous. I think that's something that we talk about a lot, but something that's super important here is time management. You only take 4 courses generally, so it's all about how you manage that, and how much you go into your professors and seek out others for help. It's manageable 100%, and you have the opportunity to take classes that you're truly interested in. So it doesn't always feel like a load of work. But yeah, time management is a really big part. And I felt personally, even though I didn't send my test scores, I still felt like I was able to transition well.
Yeah, I can talk about this too. I tell people this all the times. Holy Cross being a rigorous institution, um, that comes with work, but there's something very particular about Holy Cross that I always emphasize, and that is that it's never, in my eyes, been a cutthroat environment. I mean, I'm a chemistry major, pre-med, taking pretty serious classes where people are planning on moving on to education after Holy Cross. But by no means have I ever had a situation where somebody's coming up to me like, I don't even know how to describe it because I haven't experienced it over the last 3 years, but in no ways is it cutthroat. Professors, students, faculty, everybody I meet on campus genuinely very cares about me. And I think that speaks to, Tom, you said earlier, Cara Personalis and the community feel on Holy Cross's campus. Never have I been concerned that it's a cutthroat environment. Yeah, we're rigorous, and yeah, that transition to high academics is difficult, but people are around you and surrounding you with support in any way that they can. So I think that's been a huge thing for me at Holy Cross.
Myth number 4. We're knocking these down. Let's hear about it.
All right, myth number 4 is sort of a two-parter, so maybe we cheated a little bit. There might be 5 myths in here that we're debunking, but that's okay. Myth number 4 is the idea that the more often you take the test, say it's ACT or SAT, the better you're going to do on it. That every time you retake a test, you're going to improve your score. And while this can be true in some cases, a lot of times students will do slightly better on the ACT or the SAT their second time around taking it. You know, you might feel more comfortable with the test, you might feel more comfortable with the environment than you do the first time around. It's not an upward curve. It's not a constant upward curve. So if you're taking the ACT, let's say 4, 5, 6 times, eventually you're probably going to kind of bottom out on what your score could possibly be. So one thing to really think about, especially as you're deciding A, whether or not you want to take a test, B, which test you may want to take if you do want to take one, and then C, how many times you would want to take that test, or if you want to take both, all of those questions. These are all things that you need to answer for yourself in your admission process, and not things that we can necessarily tell you, yes, do X, Y, Z, and you will succeed. But one thing to keep in mind is that taking a test, a single test 3 or more times isn't necessarily going to improve your score. So save yourself some of that stress, save yourself some of the anxiety of trying to prepare for a test, trying to improve that score every time. If you're going to take the ACT or SAT, put your best foot forward in that first attempt, maybe a second attempt if you feel you need it. But really try to focus your energy and your time on the things that are genuinely interesting to you. Because particularly at colleges like Holy Cross that have a holistic application review, we're looking at everything that you are as a person, right? As Maggie and Andrew have said, you are so much more than just a number or a GPA or anything like that, right? So if you are worried about when to take a test or how often to take a test, try to think more about the things that you really would like to spend your time doing. Maybe that's community service work, like Andrew mentioned. Maybe that's athletics or theater or helping your grandparents out or babysitting your little brother or whatever those things are that you're really going to enjoy and grow from. Those are the things that we really care more about in your application process. So if you choose to take a test, don't stress about taking it too many times, but please do focus on some of those other aspects of your application, because that helps us really see more of who you are as a person. And that's what's important to us when we are deciding who's going to be in our class for the next upcoming year. And Andrew and Maggie, I'd really love to give you both an opportunity to comment on this if you would like to share part of your experiences about taking the ACT or SAT or anything else that we haven't covered yet that you'd like to add.
Yeah, I can jump in real quick. So I did actually take the SAT twice, and I think that I jumped the gun when I took it the first time. So not to say that you shouldn't take the exam twice, but I did see improvement the second time I took it, but it was really because I took the classes that were necessary to take the SAT that second time. And after that, I don't see how my score really would have changed too much. But I will say that that second time was an improvement, mostly probably because I had taken the classes that were actually required for the exam at that point.
That's actually a great point, Andrew. For any of you who are considering taking SAT or ACT tests for your college search process, please don't take them super early. That is one of the sort of most wasteful things that you can do in terms of your own stress as well as time and money, is to focus on trying to take the SAT as a sophomore or early in your junior year, because like Andrew said, a lot of those classes that the tests are based off of are classes you typically would take during your junior year of high school. So if you haven't taken those classes and learned the coursework, it's much more difficult to do well. So if you are going to take a test, highly recommend taking it either at the end of your junior year or earlier in your senior year, but not any earlier than that, because it really is helpful for you if you're going to take it to at least, get the best, put your best foot forward, get the most out of it that you can. So thanks for sharing that, Andrew. Maggie, did you have something you wanted to add as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I kind of reflected the example you gave. I took the ACT 3 times, and kind of just my overall score stayed the same. I think I would do better in one section and then do worse in another every single time. So I think in that experience, I did not need to take it all those times.
Well, with no unanswered questions sitting in our Q&A queue right now, our goal here was, out of respect for your time, to keep this to half of a Mythbusters episode, or really like a full episode of a sitcom on a streaming service. So I think we've accomplished that goal. And as I said that, there's one more question in the Q&A for what sections of an application are prioritized without test scores. With or without test scores, every section is going to be given a good amount of weight in terms of a student's coursework over the course of 4 years. We certainly look closely at recommendations and the different ways that students have interacted with us at the Holy Cross admission office, especially thinking about admission interviews that take place during a student's senior year, a well-written essay, and just how they generally spend their free time, whether that's a part-time job, a full-time job, athletic commitments, whatever it is that you do outside of school or within your family. These are all important aspects to us. And then, like Olivia said, the testing is an optional piece of that. So feel free to send the scores or don't. So we hope that this session has been enjoyable and maybe taken a few pounds of weight off of your already heavy shoulders. So we hope that this gives you the freedom to sign up for a standardized test and walk in feeling good and confident about yourself, but knowing that it ultimately is not going to make or break your future. So last thing I'll say before we head out is to keep in mind that we do have the virtual information sessions and tours happening at 11 o'clock Eastern time the next 2 days. And tomorrow's webinar is focused on the role of parents and guardians in the admission process. And Friday will be about how to improve your application as a current high school junior. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll hope to see you at a future virtual event.